Welcome to season 15 of the Parenting Aces Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and this week, Coach Duey Evans of the Performance Architect is back with us to talk about the work that he's been doing with tennis players, tennis parents, and tennis coaches. I am so excited to hear and to share with all of you the culmination of all the writing that Dewey has been doing over the past 18 or so months on his website, theperformancearchitect.com, about junior tennis development and really where parents fit into the process of helping their children get to the level that they aspire to. This week, we are diving deep into that. Dewey talks about some very specific things that parents can be doing and working on to really be an active member of that triad, the parent, player, coach triad. And I think you're going to learn a lot. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Coach Duey Evans. Always nice to see your smiling face, Duey Evans. Welcome back to the podcast. And I am so excited to dig into the work you are currently doing because I've been reading all this material that you've been putting out for the last, how long? Year?
Yeah, probably about 15, 16 months. So I began it March, April of 2025, really digging in wholeheartedly as I stepped off court and said, okay, what's next? So a little bit of time.
Yeah. So the Performance Architect is your kind of online platform, and I'm going to provide links in the show notes to all your work. So for those of you watching or listening to this, please go check it out. But rather than kind of rehash the stuff you've already put out, I really want to dig into how you have taken all of this kind of thought work that you've done and implemented it to help players, parents, coaches, and academies too, but we're going to focus on the player and parent piece today. I'm so antsy to get into this with you because this has been kind of in the making for so long, and now it's actually here.
Yeah, listen, I'm a geek, and if there's anything to be said for being excited about doing something, I am on fire with excitement about what I'm doing and having figured some of it out, right? So the big piece for me, well, there's two big pieces. On the player side, it's recognizing what will help the player stay engaged or find their way back to engagement as quickly as possible when they go away. And on the parent side, I believe we haven't found a role for the parent really well. And so I think that identifying a place that they can be useful other than, okay, write the checks, bring the kid, do those types of things and stay out of the way of the coaches, but giving them an actual role has provided them with a place that they feel both useful, included, and having it benefit their family. So I'm like I said, I'm on fire.
So let's start with why you decided, other than you realized being on court was you were kind of at the end of that piece of your career. Why dig into this engagement piece of it? What is it that you were seeing in your on-court work that led you to where you are today?
Well, we could look back to the last time we sat together and did this, and we were talking about communiplasticity. And so my belief that kids are leaving youth sports because of a communication problem where things are not presented in the way the kid receives them. The coach gets frustrated. The coach loses their composure. The kid says, this is absolutely horrible. I don't want to do this anymore. And we lose kids to youth sports. So I was like, okay, so how do we do that? And then I figured out that, well, I've done a pretty good job of that, and I can work directly with almost any family and help mitigate that. But then how does it scale? How do we create systems whereby we're not losing, I guess the study, and it's pretty well publicized study, but it says something like 70% of kids are leaving youth sports by around age
Age
13.
13. Yep.
Right. So how do we take that common number and not have families fall into that great big bucket? How do we keep them in the smaller bucket and make the smaller bucket grow and have it eventually become the big bucket, right? So the kids dropping out are minimal.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And there were things that you were seeing in terms of player behavior and parent behavior that got your wheels spinning, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? What
Sure.
specific things were you seeing at these tournaments, at practice sessions, hanging out around the courts?
Here's the big thing, and I see it now as I spend time observing, is players' agency, player ownership of their tennis has been usurped by the adults in the room wanting to tell rather than find out what the player is experiencing, right? So I've long had this thing in my written developmental philosophy of ask, don't tell. And I find that parents are, after matches, they're telling their kids what happened and what they saw. That's the first interaction. On court, coaches almost all the time feel like they're being paid for what they say, not what they ask, or when they're silent and, guard that space of players searching for it in their own heads. And so there's people talking over the player's experience, and we're taught or learn from a very young age that what the adults say must be what's important. And so we lose that place where the player is able to believe what they did was okay, was even good. And we don't figure out where, the error is an execution error versus a decision error, right? So sometimes a player was trying to do exactly what the coach says. They just don't have the skill level yet to be able to get it done. Yet the coach is like, oh, you made a bad decision. You shouldn't have been trying to do this. You should have been trying to do that. And, sometimes I want to say to coaches, just shh for a minute, just be quiet for a second and let the player tell you what they're thinking, and then you respond to them instead of doing it in a way that they're having to respond to you, or more accurately, not seem disrespectful and just being quiet when you tell them what to do.
I remember reading The Inner Game of Tennis and Galway talking about exactly this, right? Like he had this epiphany teaching a group of adult players that if he would just be quiet and be on court, be a presence, but allow these adults that he was working with to come to the realizations on their own of where they were making errors, where they were doing things well, that the player had that innate ability if given the space. And you're kind of building on that notion of coaches and parents, we've got to take a step back and allow the player the space to self-reflect, analyze, and then vocalize what they need and want.
I think that's great. I guess maybe I need to acknowledge that my work is being built on the work of Timothy Galway. While I read The Inner Game of Tennis, it was probably 30 plus years ago, and I hadn't realized that that was in there. But I am also a believer that there probably are no new ideas. There are just new ways of connecting those ideas to current circumstances. And yeah, couldn't be in better company, right? I haven't heard anybody say anything bad about The Inner Game of Tennis over all of these decades. It's one of those.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the specifics of the work you're doing. Those who aren't familiar with you, and if you're not familiar with Dewey, go back in our archives and read all the stuff and watch all the podcasts. But you've been at Austin Tennis Academy for the past how many years?
I've been started out there with them as a client and me doing social media, essentially performing marketing functions for 7 years. And then I went
Okay.
on court because I got tired of being courtside and people not knowing that I had formerly been a coach, and Coach Newman asking me things when he was on court with the higher level players and me giving answers. And so I asked if I could coach. And so then
Yeah.
I was a coach for 5 years or so, and stepped off the court in January of last year, 2025. Um, and so now I'm not on court. I do some classroom work. I do some consulting. I work with some players and things other than how to hit forehands, backhands, and serves. Although I have
Yeah.
to say that I find it hard to resist jumping in sometimes and giving my opinion. So yeah.
Once a
So
tennis coach,
I
always a
work
tennis
with
coach.
ATA. They're a client.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of what you have been doing in the last year and a half ish is observing and
Mhm.
taking a lot of notes
Mhm.
and letting your wheels turn to formulate these observations into actionable practices. And you've been kind of working through all of that through your writing, but then trying stuff out in real time, but then
Mhm.
reflecting back and writing again, and then going and tweaking and back and forth. And I would love for you, if you're comfortable, sharing some of the work that the actionable work that you have done with parents and players to put into practice these ideas that have been brewing in the Dewey brain.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything I write about comes from real life experience. I'm not looking at other people's theory. I'm not just asking AI to give me AI slop. I'm really trying to take my own personal experiences and bring anecdotes where I feel like it's possible. Unfortunately, I
Mhm.
have to protect some private relationships. And so I'm not always speaking from little Johnny did this and I saw that. I'm
Yeah.
speaking in a more general framework. But I've been working and talking to parents, talking to players, spending time with players after tournament matches, talking to parents while they're observing, understanding where those things are. I'll give you an example. I was recently watching two players play in the semifinals of a pretty high level event. And I was talking to one of the players' parents who I'd never met before. And they came up to me and they introduced themselves and they said, I was talking to their kid's name. And then they were talking about they're just taking up tennis themselves, the parent. And they were talking about how hard it was to focus and how over the course of a match, find some times when wasn't really quite there. And their kid said to them, you should say this to Coach Dewey because what we've been talking about is drifting, right? So that you can't be right there all the time, that it's normal for everybody to phase in and out of focus during competition. And so, that's a place that I noticed. At the same time, I noticed that that child had started out the match winning. Their opponent, who was an older player, but who had been a training buddy several years ago, started out very negative and was losing, right? So over the course of the match, the negativity infected the player who had been winning, the son of the person I was talking to. The parent said, haven't seen him like this in a long time. And so one of the things that fit in with what I had been talking about, and then the player who had been winning ended up losing. And so
Oh,
we've been talking a lot this summer about the things which cause drift. And one of them is the people around us. So association, breeding, assimilation, right? So if one person drifts in a group, the whole group tends to drift. And what I also noticed was it's not just the people on your side. Like the guy on the
Yeah.
other side of the net, that negativity can creep in to you because that becomes the norm of what you're around in that match situation. And it probably, you don't feel as much like you stand out if you let your negativity out. And, that's just one recent observation, which I don't know if it comes out in something that comes out when it is, but it's in an article that I'm writing or have written.
Okay.
So
And
there are lots of things like that.
by drifting, you mean focus is coming in and out. You're, instead of being lasered in on what's happening right in front of you, you notice that the player is maybe looking around or maybe paying too much attention to what's happening on their parents' faces or paying too much attention to their opponent's negativity in this case. And so that draws them out of the moment where they can focus on the things they know they should be doing on court. Am I stating that correctly?
Yeah. So I'm gonna give a plug to an episode of your podcast that I watched, and I showed players that I'm working with in a group situation. It was one that you did with Sukwa and Jack Satterfield and Ronit. And at about the 20-minute mark, there's a place where Jack talks about something he heard Novak Djokovic say. And he talks about that Djokovic says that it's common. Everybody's going to go in and out. Everybody's going to have those moments where they drift. And the key is how quickly do you notice it? And then do you have the skills to bring yourself back from it? So it's not trying to make yourself never go on walkabout, but it's recognizing when you are on walkabout, making sure it doesn't happen at 5-3 in a tiebreaker or down 5-3 in a tiebreaker, and all of a sudden it's over. And then trying to, figure out where does it fit best in. So one of the things that we've been talking about is what the in-between point rituals are. And so, Jim Lair's 16-second cure, and where within the 4 stages of that is the place where you can drift and kind of go on walkabout for a couple seconds, because you really can't. Anybody who's watching this has undoubtedly sat through exams, right? And anybody who has sat through a final exam has had that moment where they just put their pencil down and they just sat for a minute, right? I can't think about this for a second. I got to just give myself a break. And that's important, right? So I don't know another environment other than maybe a very long final where you're in an environment where there's other people all around you. And for 2 to 3 hours, you can't talk to any of them, right? That's a tennis match. What an unusual, uncommon, probably unhealthy situation that is. So trying to find ways to help people mitigate the challenge of those environments. That's a lot of what I'm doing.
Okay. So in this particular instance, you see this kid that's winning all of a sudden get sucked into the opponent's negativity and start losing. Did the kid pull himself back, or was the match over before that happened?
Match was over before it happened. He never fully figured it out. Now, I haven't spoken with him since the match. He's not someone that I'm working with the family or, the player individually. And so I didn't have a chance to speak with him about it, but no, he didn't learn. And so that's one of the places that I believe the parent piece of it fits in. So what are the questions the parent asks?
Sorry, you were sitting with his parents during this whole thing, right?
Yeah, not the whole thing, but a good part of it, probably 2/3 of it. I was in proximity.
What were the parents doing as their child got sucked into the negativity and started to lose the match? My AirPod just fell out. Sorry.
Saying, come on.
Yeah.
Being unaware the parents aren't tennis players, although at least one of them is taking up tennis. So they weren't, I don't know, they weren't overanalyzing it. The players' primary coach was also sitting with them. So they were undoubtedly having more conversations with the primary coach who, lots of great experience, won the NCAA doubles title, partnering with Kevin Anderson wasn't a bad partner, right?
Yeah.
But a very good coach with a lot of insightful information. So it was just kind of an aside that I got to talk to the parent. One of the better tennis parents that I've seen, in that there was no real anxiety. There was no getting upset with what was going on. It very much was, wow, we haven't seen this level of negative energy from the player for some time now. But it was something that they had noticed in the past and were working actively towards getting better at.
Interesting. So in that situation, I know you're doing a lot of work on the moments immediately following the match and what the parent's role is in those moments. That's where I'd like to kind of go next in this conversation, because this is Parenting Aces. We're trying to help these parents be better at this whole crazy role that they're in. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you have been seeing in terms of parent behavior immediately following a match, whether it's a positive or a negative, and how you are educating parents to do it better, differently, better.
My role at the moment in a lot of cases is to help parents recognize their space within their child's development, right? So there's oftentimes that a parent is the only person there at the end of the match, that unless you're spending exorbitant amounts of money, you don't have a personal coach watching you. Even if your academy sends coaches, they're probably watching multiple players. So, right after the match, maybe the coach doesn't get interaction. And so getting the parent to have a specific role that they recognize. And the primary role to me is guarding the player's immediate reflection. So not intervening. I've used the word pollute. So don't pollute that player's recollection. Don't help reframe it, and don't rescue them from the silence. So asking very open-ended questions as opposed to leading questions. But I think many of us are really good at asking questions, but we're really just leading people to what we want them to say. So really asking open-ended questions so the player believes they can answer honestly, that it's not a value judgment on them as a person, and then being quiet and recognizing that I don't know could be the most valuable response you can get from a player. And unfortunately, a lot of us then feel like that's our chance to jump in. I don't know means that they're going back and trying to figure it out. And so our job as the first person they interact with, whether that be a coach or a parent, largely a parent, is to just be quiet and let that silence serve a role, right? I think we've all been in rooms where we were very comfortable and the silence was comfortable. And we've been in other rooms where there was this huge tension. Silence is like the loudest thing that there can be. And so trying to figure out, how do we allow the silence to be quiet and calm, and give the player the chance to go back, think through the match, asking, what were you trying to do? And then when they kind of, figure out, okay, that's what I was trying to do. And then maybe asking another open-ended question of, when was it harder to do that? And have them go back and figure out, well, it was when, the person was taking time away from me and I couldn't execute, or whatever it happens to be. But giving them a chance to go back through. And I also believe that when that happens, and it happens consistently, it helps the players be more in the moment when they're playing the match, right? So another totally off of ATA, I had a client whose parent had heard me talk to their kid at a tournament one time. And then they came to me recently asking if I would work with them. My first meeting with the player was really simple. They told me about an ITF they played last summer. And then they were telling me about a moment, and you could see that they were running the movie on the inside of their head, that they had been there. And then the player said to me, I couldn't tell you about any moment like that in a tournament I played 2 weeks ago. And which really says the anxiety in the player's mind is one, he has a very active mind. And so he hadn't been able to find that. 2 weeks in a row now, we've had discussions where he was running things in his head that had happened in the tournament a few days before. And the conversation, like, okay, so this hasn't happened since last summer, but now it's happening again. What happened? And the answer I got back was, I think the other voices in my head have quieted enough for my own voice to be there. So I'm not thinking about what coach told me after, or what my dad told me I was supposed to do, or what mom said in the ride to or from. I was very much connected to how I believed about it. And that enabled me to have greater recall later. I think that's
How profound is that?
yeah, but I don't think those moments are uncommon. They're only uncommon because nobody looks for them. That we're so busy trying to be the know-it-all, and we're trying to make sure everybody knows how much we know, that we don't spend any time thinking about what they know. And if we're trying to help them, why wouldn't that be the highest priority?
Yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense, but listen, most of us, our instinct as parents is to rescue, to save, to swoop in, to prevent pain, to prevent discomfort, to prevent sadness and disappointment and all the things, right? That's our instinct. It's really hard to control that instinct, even when we know intellectually that if we don't stop that instinct from kicking in, we're actually impeding our child's ability to grow.
It's hard. It's the hardest thing. And I'm glad that I had 3 kids and that, they're all grown now. Two of them went through junior tennis, and one of them played pretty high level. My middle one, who didn't play as high a level because of some injuries that happened, as she entered high school, is now actually coming back and beginning to teach at Austin Tennis Academy in the next month. Watching her go through the struggles was like anything I've ever seen before. So I sent more texts back to the tennis center while my kids were playing their own matches, and redesigned the program who knows how many times, where by Monday, I wasn't doing any of that. It was just me being in panic mode, watching my own kids struggle with whatever it was that was going on at that moment in time. And, I've been the parent that got up and went around the corner. And if my kid was watching, they were undoubtedly focused on, okay, dad's mad at me now, what's going on? And that causes the drift that we were talking about, right? So I'm the cause of it. But it's almost unavoidable. So now if we can use the things that happen in between points, so instead of watching and seeing how mom and dad is reacting, my racket goes to my non-dominant hand, my eyes go to the strings. I might be thinking about what Dr. Valverde talked about, going to my happy place. So I have that happy world at my vacation home and all those things. And I'm visualizing that in mirror on my strings. And I'm not seeing my parent walk around the corner. Maybe I can help prevent drift.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. But what I think is so fascinating, Dewey, is the reframing of the questions, because words matter. We know this. In the moment when we as parents are so emotionally charged because either our kids just won a match and so we're pumped and excited and we go to that, we won. Well, no, we didn't win, our kid won. So we go to that place, or our kids just lost a match and we are dejected for our child, yes, but also, let's be honest, it doesn't feel good to watch your child lose. And even if you're the most progressed parent who's been through all the training and read all the books and understands the psychology, it's still really hard not to feel that and to react to it. So what you're doing now, this work, is really training parents to take back control of that emotional response and turn it into something that they train, they practice, they implement. They may mess up, they learn from the mess up, they implement again. So just as a player is grooving a new forehand, parents are grooving this new way of responding after a match. It's a process.
I'm not sure what the question is there, but I would say that I don't train anybody at this point in time to do anything. What I do is I try to present, here are some options. And if you want to take that option, here I can help you move through it and understand how you're reacting to it, and help give you feedback, right? So while I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, but I'd like to think that I can be that mirror that can talk you through it and be absolutely present in all conversations and communications, and help send it back to you in a way that you can see yourself in it. Yeah. Now, are there some things that are really good? Yes, making available for free something called, the Parent Pause Guide. So what it's like right after the competition, and then how do you ask the question and do what I was speaking about a couple minutes ago, but then be quiet in the situation and understand the importance and the value of pausing. And instead of waiting for your turn to talk, because your turn to talk is going to come, and it's absolutely valuable that you have an opinion and nobody's saying care less or anything else.
Yeah.
But having that moment where you're actively listening for signs that the player is searching for the answers within themselves. So that guide's available for free. And I love having those things because there's no secrets to this. You opened this conversation with Timothy Galway. And if you haven't read that book, read that book. I'm sure it's in print in whatever edition that it is, because it's a timeless book.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to get your free guide, how do parents get that? They just email you and you'll send it, or is it available online somewhere?
Yeah, they email me. I haven't quite set it up where it's available on my website, but it's certainly, one of those things that I'd love to have your email address in order to send it to you. So if you send me a note that has your email address to send it to, then I'll get it that way. Not saying that you're never going to get another piece of thing from me asking you to buy something from me, because I am in this is how I pay my bills at this point in time. But I'm happy to give it just as every day, pretty much daily. Blog articles go out which have the best of this information in them.
Yeah. But I think your guide kind of pulls pieces from all of your articles and puts it into one concise document that is a little more consumable. And so I urge all of you watching or listening to this, and we'll have Dewey's email address in the show notes. Do reach out and get this. If you are a tennis parent, this is going to be about, even if you have other children that do other activities, this is stuff that you will use with your kids, whether it's after a big test at school, after science fair, or whatever it is. These are just parent skills. It's not necessarily tennis parent specific, but that said, I think what I find so fascinating about all of this is the notion that we as parents have got to trust our kids' ability to self reflect and communicate. And oftentimes we don't do that as parents. We don't trust their ability and we want to just feed them the answers, as you've said. So I would love if you would share some of the open-ended questions some more. You've already shared a few, but let's say the kids come off court, we know already we've got to give them that 15 minutes or whatever it is to decompress. Okay, we're letting them do that. You have said, I think, Dewey, and correct me if I'm wrong, that 15 minutes of decompression is where they are going to start thinking about the match and try and frame it in such a way that it is indeed a learning experience. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes we don't have 15 minutes. Sometimes it's next match is on in an hour and we want to get through this and we've got to go figure out how to get food and we got to do other things. Other times we have a little more time, but we feel like from a parent perspective, we want to get this out of the way. And
Yeah.
sometimes the kid's not ready for it. And so sometimes, you can ask that open-ended question of when was it hard? And then you get nothing back. And then asking a simple question of, would you like to write about this a little bit before we talk about it? Or do you need some food and do you need some time? And so that recognizing that you're being respectful of them and where they are, but at the same time, making sure that they recognize you're not just blowing it off and they didn't get out of having to talk about it at some point in time.
Yeah.
I think that that's the important part, right? So come back to the word agency, so that they can have ownership of their tennis, but that there's also a level of accountability. And I think that that's important, right? So if we're teaching life lessons, quote unquote, accountability is something that exists across the board. And so recognizing that, okay, you're going to have to do it. We're not totally, you don't get out of doing it by distracting me, or allowing us to be distracted. So then asking those questions, but avoiding questions like, why did you hit your forehand line so often when you were missing? Right? That's not an open-ended question. That is a question where it is obvious that I'm thinking that was muy malo, bad, and I'm telling you, you shouldn't have done it, yet I put a question mark at the end. And so therefore it's phrased as a question, but there's no question about it, right? I guess we would call that a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
And so how do we avoid those questions which come up so often? And I think that happens generally with a parent trying to move themselves from being telling to wanting to be that person that's asking questions. And maybe that's an intermediary step as they move themselves
Right.
to where they are actually taking a deep breath and then asking the open-ended question, which gives space for the player to tell what they think, without fearing judgment, right? So I think that as young people, we all fear judgment. And I was observing a younger coach within the past week, and they did something, and I pulled them to the side, or asked them if they had a couple seconds, and then they came over to me, and I said, I think you just made a rookie mistake. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, well, you just explained something in great detail to the player, and then you asked the player, did they understand? And the player said yes. Do you think they understood? Or were what kid is going to say, no, I didn't understand. Can you explain it a little more? I didn't quite understand what you meant here, because kids don't want to seem stupid, right? So if you do those things and you give them the out of, if I just agree with you, then you'll move on, then that doesn't do the job. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a process that again, I'll say it takes practice. And as parents, we're not going to get it right all the time. There are even the best tennis parents sometimes have a bad day. And it's okay. And we have to let ourselves off the hook. But I think that this idea of the pause, and that's a concept that I learned about in yoga, that there is value in the breath between this pose and this pose, that our minds, our bodies sometimes just need that pause to recalibrate and get ready for what's next. So we have to understand that the pause isn't wasted time. It is something very valuable, both mentally and physically, that we need.
Yeah, I lived for a decade with a trained communications coach and media trainer who worked with us when we were doing our podcast together, you and I. And one of the things that she would do when working with people who had to be on camera was talk about pauses. And so we would do something, and then we would pause, and then we would watch it back later. And what we came to recognize, or I came to recognize, she already knew, was it feels like forever when we pause and people are just staring at us like, is this person ever going to talk again? And then we watch it back and it was barely a pause. I could have paused so much longer and nobody would have seen it as anything abnormal. But that's where we live in that space, that we've got to become more comfortable with the silence for a little bit longer and not, again, I'm going to use the word, not polluting that environment, or rescuing the player from the silence, right? I think that we're guilty of, we rescue them. They don't feel like they ever need to answer because they know if they just, for a couple seconds, we're going to jump in with the blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to another coach this morning before you and I got on this call about what's happening in college coaching. And this coach was telling me how they were watching the NCAAs, and there was one coach of one particular team that was out on the court after every single point, coaching the player, telling the player what they had done wrong, what they needed to do next. And the coach I was talking to was like, what is that? Like, are they just trying to prove their value to the team? Or how is that helping this player perform better in the moment when they have no time for a pause? Because the second that ball is dead, the coach is on the court spewing at them. And I thought that was such an interesting observation, and the complete opposite of what you and I are talking about giving players space to process and helping players develop these rituals to help them reflect and process in a very brief amount of time, but in a way that is going to help them move forward in the match, both in terms of their performance, but also in terms of their kind of EQ around the match, and then their ability to analyze afterward.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been watching with interest this year is pro tennis, now that coaching is allowed. And so what coaches are constantly jibber jabbering at their player versus which ones are being quiet. And while I don't know Carlos Alcaraz or Juan Carlos Ferrero personally, one of the things I've been told by players who've been in that environment is Ferrero gave Alcaraz no space to think for himself. He was essentially telling him where and what serve to hit every point. And so recognizing or observing what goes on now with Carlos, now that he went off on his own and his team probably views him more as the lead, where Juan Carlos Ferrero probably said, this is still my player because the relationship started when Alcaraz was young. And so it was
Right.
very much a mentor-mentee relationship. But what happens now when it's much more of a peer relationship, or even the player is slightly higher? How does Alcaraz deal with that? I think Alcaraz took it as a I'm going to show him moment, which panned out at the beginning of the year. He said, yeah, I can do this on my own. I don't need somebody in my ear telling me how to do this. I'm the player. You're not the puppeteer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting to see how that's working. And I think it's also interesting to see that junior tennis is the only place where coaching still isn't part of the requiem, that we're out there and the players out there and we still can't say anything, and a
Yeah.
parent says come on in the wrong tone of voice, it's now coaching. And so yeah, still a cool learning place. And I think if we can help everybody involved to understand that, if we can give agency to the player so that they can think in real time, recognize when things are happening, rather than having to wait and see if the right piece of information comes to them from an external source at that optimal moment in time, the better we're going to position people to use these tools throughout their lives to create, whatever they want to have in their lives in the future.
I love it. I think we end there, Dewey. And before we close this out, again, if people are interested in reaching out to you, you want to share how they can do that?
Sure. They can head to my website, which is theperformancearchitect.com. And then if you backslash it blog, it will take you right to my blog essays, and you can search for forever. Or you can email me at Dewey, Duey, at theperformancearchitect.com. Or you can actually even call me at my vanity phone number, which is 469-955 Dewey. So 3839 spells Dewey on the keypad. So yeah, reach out to me. Love to talk to you. If you just call, and I generally don't answer numbers that I don't know the number. But if you leave me a message, I'll call you back. And if you just want to chat for 20 minutes about tennis and your kid, happy to do that, not charging you anything. If you find that the conversation has value and you want to have a more formal relationship, happy to entertain that too.
And same goes for academies, right? You're happy to come into academies and work with them, and work with the coaches, work with the players, work with the parents, to help move things forward in terms of giving these players the power and agency to take back control of their tennis.
Yeah, that's probably where I spend more time than anything else at the moment, is working at the enterprise level. So working with academy directors, academy programs on how to implement some of these things within their existing curriculum. So kind of, I would call it more of an overlay than making it a native part of the program. But yeah, I love doing that too.
Awesome. Dewey, always a pleasure. Love seeing you on my Zoom, and always love talking with you. I learn from you every time, and I so appreciate you taking the time to come back on the podcast.
Absolutely. I learn from all the podcasts. Like I've referenced one, I watch everyone still all the time. Great information. If this is the only one you've seen, go back and look at all of the others that Lisa does. She puts them out every week. And yeah, what a great resource. So love Parenting Aces.
Thanks, Dewey. And to my audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Parenting Aces.